Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl. I'm the current president of the Interreligious Council of Linn County. On this morning's show, we're going to be talking about industrial solar in Iowa. And here to discuss this very relevant and timely topic, I have two guests with me this morning. So before we jump into the topic, I'd like each of you just to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why this particular topic is important to you.
Well, I'll kick off the conversation, and thank you again for the invitation on this subject. My name is Ben Rogers. I'm the chair of the Linn County Board of Supervisors, and my interest in this is several important topics, but namely, Linn County has had two utility scale solar applications come before us in the last 6 to 8 months. One is a 700 acre field in Coggan, Iowa, which will generate about 100 megawatts. And recently, as of last week, we approved a much larger solar array in Palo, which is a 200 megawatt projected site with a 75 megawatt battery. So that's my interest.
Thank you, Ben.
That's great. My name is Kamyar Enshayan. I work at University of Northern Iowa, a center that does community action. We're focused on energy conservation at the community scale, developing food system, strengthening our local food system, as well as improving our environmental health. I'm interested in this topic because we need to transition away from fossil energy to renewable sources of energy, but how we do it is a very important question, and it's wonderful to have the Board of Supervisors as part of this, because we know local governments have a very important role to play. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kamyar and Ben. And again, lots to discuss here. To kind of get us started, just a few facts related to kind of in the industrial solar industry, as I'll call it. But according to the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is a government agency, the amount of sunlight that strikes the Earth's surface in an hour and a half is enough to handle the entire world's energy consumption for a full year. So the point, there's a lot of potential there. Solar represents 8% of net summer capacity in the US and roughly 4% of the annual energy generation in the US. And finally, 11 states generated more than 6% of their electricity from solar last year, with California leading the way at 25%. So kind of keeping with that theme, Ben, I thought you could kind of kick us off with where are we at that state level here in Iowa when it comes to kind of being the leader in solar energy, and how do you see us moving into the future?
Iowa is certainly known as a leader in wind energy. If you go anywhere out on the western part of the state, you'll see a lot of wind turbines. And Iowa is regarded as a net exporter of energy, which is great. You don't want to be a net importer of energy. You'll be paying a lot more per kilowatt. But solar is a new venture in Iowa. Certainly you see them in a lot of other states, but what's special and unique about Iowa is one, that we have a ton of agricultural land available. I think Iowa has roughly 25 million acres of agriculturally zoned space. So you have a lot of space in which these panels can be utilized. And Iowa can become a leader in the Midwest for solar power and diversifying our energy needs. And right now, I'm aware of obviously the two projects here in Linn County, but there's also another utility-sized array in Wapello County. So we're kind of on the leading edge of utility-scale solar in Iowa. There's a lot of other counties who are taking up this issue, and their boards are either creating setback distances that make these projects unattainable, or they put certain restrictions on the type of soil, the corn suitability rating, that if it's if it's above a certain CSR, then you can't have utility scale solar. So Iowa's approach is fragmented at the moment, but I'm really encouraged that Linn County is a leader in this space, and I look forward to hopefully more counties looking at helping their communities transition away from fossil fuels and diversifying our energy needs as we're several decades into the 21st century, and the time is right to do it now.
Yeah, Ben, I think it's a good point that there's, it's a new industry here in Iowa, and we're all becoming kind of familiar with it. Kamyar, I'd like to bring you in here and just your perspective when it comes to solar energy generally, its impact on the environment, the ability to kind of produce this renewable energy, and how you see that unfolding here in Iowa and throughout the U.S. for that matter.
Well, I think, as Ben mentioned, wind and solar are kind of the native sources of energy for Iowa. We have the sun, we have the wind, we have also conservation. That's another big one. What we do culturally to not use energy. So that's those three things are kind of our native sources of energy. And I'd like to kind of connect to what Ben mentioned, which is this idea of, which is one of the questions that comes up, right? It's taking up agricultural land, right? That the solar takes up agricultural land, and therefore we shouldn't be doing it. Well, so I mean, that's like you drive down the highway, you see this sign says no industrial solar. It's kind of it's unfortunate, but that's why we're here talking about it. Okay, so first of all, you should know that more than half of all corn grounds as we speak are producing energy for ethanol for export. Okay, so that's something we got to face and say, well, if that's used for energy, then what's wrong with putting solar on it? It's not harming anything. In fact, I would argue, I'm an agricultural engineer. I know a little bit about soil and about what happens out there. If we put solar panels, nothing changes. Actually, nothing happens to the soil. The soil will be growing some vegetation, but it will not be fertilized. It will not be sprayed pesticides. And it actually will be better used if there was sun on it generating electricity, compared to the same corn grown and turned into ethanol mostly for export. So that's kind of something to think about. So so the thing is, our energy has to come from somewhere. Our electricity has to come from somewhere. We better take responsibility for growing it here. And we got to face, if we don't want it, then we have to have a proposal on where our electricity is going to come from. And coal and natural gas are not an option. Now, nuclear is not an option either, because it's not a renewable source of energy. So these are considerations. So that's why I think it's something we have to face. We have to say our electricity has to come from somewhere. Solar and wind can meet our needs, and so here we are.
Yeah, very good. Ben, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I really like the fact that you're an agricultural engineer and understand about the soil health. That's one of the benefits of these utility solar arrays, is they're not permanent. After 30 years, first of all, let me go back. This is all voluntary. Landowners are approached and they sign contracts with an entity for 30 years, and there may be options for additional time after that. It's completely voluntary. There's no eminent domain. The farmers get paid per acre, And the professor is exactly correct. We're just trading energy sources. Instead of harvesting the sun to grow corn, which is then produced into ethanol, we're harvesting the sun to create electrons to get put onto the grid. So this is completely voluntary. It allows farmers to diversify their farm operations, invest in different technologies. For a lot of family farms, this is the difference between having to sell off their land or being able to keep it in the family. And unlike housing developments or big lot stores or anything that requires pavement, this is not a permanent structure. So a lot of the discussion we had in Palo was very interesting because Palo has those high voltage transmission lines, which makes that area really suitable for utility scale solar because of the nuclear power plant. And so there was a lot of discussion about taking agricultural ground out of production, but you know, if that's going to be in the city's growth pattern, those farm fields are going to be purchased and then paved. And so I think that this is a better use of land for the long term. It gets returned back to the farmer. It gets returned with better soil conditions. And hopefully by the time that the project ends, we've really scaled up our renewable energy sources.
And if I may add, if I may just quickly add that if those who are concerned, this argument that ground is taken out of production for non-agricultural purposes is not a genuine argument, because we in Iowa are constantly paving over prime farmland for parking lots and for roads, most of them unnecessary. So, you know, it's like we need to be, you know, if we're serious about that, we would be doing a lot more serious farmland conservation. And at least the solar and wind farms, I should add, they allow complete use of the land. And I mean, wind farms do. And in the case of solar, the land will always be there. If you pull up a few stakes and leave, and the land is still there, soil intact.
Now, one of the things I had looked at when I was researching this, very fascinating, was that there is oftentimes, and I don't know if it's standard practice here in Iowa, and Ben, hopefully you can enlighten us on this, but that there's kind of an evaluation of the type of agricultural land that you would be building these farms on. And the preference is that it's kind of low grade, right? Agricultural land. So in floodplains, you know, sandy soil, point being where you wouldn't ideally want to plant crops. Is that part of the evaluation? Do you see that being part of the evaluation in the future?
Yes, great question. It is part of the evaluation, and our goal is to steer development away from, as you've heard me reference it before, CSR, which is the corn suitability rating. There's certain again, as you said, there's areas that are more sandy, that are lower performing, not as prime farm ground. But so that's all taken into consideration there, and as well as conservation and natural resource areas that a farmer can say, I don't want any of these trees cut down. I don't want this conservation natural resource area to be touched at all, but I'll give all my other land around it. So landowners do have a lot of say of what happens to their land while it's being leased by these companies. So yes, we do look at the corn suitability rating, but also, as the professor said, we pave over CSR or corn in good soil all the time. This is a non-permanent structure that gets decommissioned, and the land is returned to a native state with soil quality that is hopefully much better than before, and certainly that has a cascading impact to water quality and a whole host of other issues. So I understand the political and philosophical disagreements of utility scale solar, but when you really look at its benefit, taking some ground temporarily out of production to ensure that we reduce our use of fossil fuels is I think a good use of land, and is being good land stewards.
So we're about halfway through the episode here and still lots to cover. I wanted to maybe shift just slightly and kind of talk about, because we mentioned at the beginning how Iowa is a leader in wind energy and wind production. And what's the case for saying we need to invest in solar energy here in Iowa versus, let's say, more wind turbines? How does the energy creation, uh, the cost of installation and maintenance and upkeep, so on and so forth, compare to wind energy here in Iowa? And Ben, I can go to that, or Kumar, whoever wants to jump in on it.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I'll start just a little. I mean, you really need to talk to solar installers and people who are managing large solar farms or wind farms in terms of maintenance of solar versus wind. Seems like solar doesn't have moving parts. There's very little maintenance. There's no sound. There's nothing. It's just panels sitting there generating electricity. There are the two go together. There are sunny days that are not windy, and there are nights that are windy. So the solar kind of can shave off peak load. There's all kinds of advantages to solar and to wind. So we need both of them. But maybe later we can come to a different question of, do they have to all be concentrated in these large facilities? Can they be on rooftops more, and etc.? I'd like for us to explore that question a little bit later.
And we can jump into it now. Then, if thinking in terms of some of the stuff I read was, well, wait a second, why don't we just put them on top of houses, and there you go, right? We don't have to take up the farmland for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When you're looking at it on its face, it seems like a reasonable argument. Why can't we put these on every roof or on roofs all over the city, let's say of Cedar Rapids, where you wouldn't have to take land out of production, that there's a benefit to the homeowners, it may increase their property value. In theory, that sounds great, but in practicality, you would have thousands of homes that have solar panels on them. That would be I just think a maintenance nightmare versus having them concentrated on large scale. We're talking several thousand acres here to generate these types of megawatts. I think the Palo project is over 1,100 acres at this point. The Coggin one is 750 acres. It is land intensive, but it's all concentrated. All the panels are there. The technicians can get to it versus having to climb up on ladders, making sure that they have permission from the homeowner. It's just easier and more efficient to build it in one place than have it scattered throughout a city, or to have pockets of it.
And I can imagine just its exposure to the sun, right, in an open field versus maybe a treed city, although Cedar Rapids have a lot of trees these days, but yeah.
So kind of along those lines, so yeah, maybe we shouldn't think of it on every home, though cities have responsibility to come up with energy ordinances that require any new structure that goes out there to supply a good chunk of their own electrical needs. But think of rooftops of public spaces. Think of parking lots. Surely a utility company can make arrangements with Walmart, with all these large parking lots, to actually shade them and to put their panels there. Yes, you're right. It is more headache and it's more involvement, but it takes less space. Let's just use the space we have. That's something to be determined. I mean, right now, we have people who want to build large solar farms, and so we got to deal with it. But I think as a policy, as a state, we need to think about using the rooftops we have. There are very large buildings with flat roofs out there that there could be agreements with utilities, et cetera, et cetera. With one reason, maybe I'll bring up one issue, and one of my concern about these very large facilities is they're kind of they operate on the thinking that of central power stations, right? Like a power plant, versus a distributed system that is in a community all over the place rather than one place. And I know, so it's a different business model, and utilities have a hard time with it, and that's why they've been fighting solar in general and even wind. So I don't know. That's something that we need to think about. I don't know. All I know is that there is roof space available. We need to figure out how to do it. Just because it's complicated doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
All right, so we have about 8 minutes here. I thought I'd read a statement here, Ben, that I think kind of encapsulates and Kamyar, kind of the it's like all the arguments against solar energy or solar industrial solar rolled into one sentence. So hang on. But I was reading it regarding a project in northern Illinois that was 3,700 acres, and this was on, I think, Northern Public Radio. By Katie Andrasky, and this is from September 6th, so just a few days ago. So she says, quote, "These solar panels will be manufactured by slave labor in China using coal and rare earth minerals whose mines are hell on earth, all to absorb 180 days of sunlight and send the electricity elsewhere while our rates go up and we subsidize it with our taxes." So I think there's about 12 objections in there, but either one of you, if you want to just take one or two of those, and kind of what is your response to that concern?
There's certainly some policy, I would have some policy disagreements, but I can understand their sentiment. I had a meeting recently with former Governor Terry Branstad, who is also the ambassador to China, and we spoke about this, and there are concerted efforts to ensure that certain areas that we don't receive panels from certain areas in China that we believe are made by slave labor. But the unfortunate part is the same argument can be made for the creation of your cell phone. We have to dig up the same rare earth metals. Typically, these phones are produced by people in other foreign countries and horrendous conditions where they are paid nothing remotely in the conversation of a livable wage whatsoever, and they can't afford to even buy the products that they make. So there's a lot of things that as consumers we get that we probably don't understand where the materials are sourced, who puts them together, and there are, I think, at the federal level, certain activities to try and ensure that we get panels produced without, things called polyfluoroalkyl, which is a PFAS, which is a forever chemical, really trying to ensure that it's not made with slave labor. This is the same arguments made about conflict diamonds with our cell phones, with lithium ion batteries. Unfortunately, human activity causes a lot of environmental destruction. We're trying to limit that destruction while at the same time moving off of a destructive fossil fuel source. So I understand the person's objections, but on this, I think it's if we can make more panels in the United States, if we can make more panels in Western Europe and elsewhere, I think that could go a long ways.
Great. Yeah, I'll just add quickly that I agree everything you said, Ben, and I think it would be good for the solar industry to come out and explain exactly how solar panels are made and how after 35 years, 40 years, how do they recycle? What are the issues? I think we need to be honest about that. And you're so right. And we need to be honest about the cell phone, all these things. But particularly if we're going to invest so much, if we're banking on solar to kind of be a solution to kind of generate clean energy, then we got to be really upfront about okay, exactly what are some of the environmental problems and how they can be addressed. I think we come out ahead if we do that. So that's one topic. I mean, it also said 180 days of sunlight. We get 365 days of sunlight everywhere. There's a lot of sunlight out there.
Yeah, I think I was reading some regarding. I think people's objection is, well, there's cloudy days, right, and those aren't absorbing sun or generating electricity. And I think the fact is, no, it isn't, or it is. They are absorbing sunlight and producing electricity, but just not at the rate it is on a perfectly sunny day. So we just have a few minutes left. I think I'll end with a bang here. Obviously, a lot of this focus on renewable energy is our movement away from fossil fuels and its contribution to climate change through carbon emissions, global warming. The critics, right, of the solar industry point to the fact that, well, although during its life cycle it's not producing carbon, during the production of these solar panels and the manufacturing of them, it does produce a fair amount of carbon emissions, producing a significant carbon footprint. What are your comments on that, maybe as it compares to fossil fuels, or however you want to go with it? So we have about 3 minutes.
Well, you don't have to drill in Alaska for solar panels. So yes, does this create carbon? Yes. So do the materials used to make Teslas, but it's also investing right now in new technologies that make the production of these much more efficient, smaller. We find better ways to produce them. So we're trying to be on the leading edge, hopefully of a revolution of technology that may help us extend humans' existence on the planet. But it certainly has to start somewhere. And I'm really proud that in Linn County, we've made this a priority and look forward to this experience. And I hope it pays off the way that it's been sold to us.
Kamyar?
Yeah, well, the solar, you got to think of it as a life cycle. So yes, it takes initial energy to make anything, but over the lifetime, how much energy it produces way exceeds the energy it took to make it. And again, in the case of fossil energy, I mean, it's all emissions. I mean, think about it. It's all emissions. There's no comparison between solar and coal. It's just not going to emit anything once you count all the energy that it produced over its lifetime. So it's called, energy return on energy invested, and sun comes out ahead.
So we just have about a minute left. So I think I'll end with you, Ben, on your thoughts on, and you kind of spoke at this at the beginning, but your thoughts on the future of solar energy in Iowa and where you see this, where you see us headed.
Well, what'll be really interesting is, so right now it's sort of a patchwork. Counties, Wapello, Linn County, but there are other counties that are trying to do away with utility scale solar by setting setback distances that make these just not doable, creating standards that no one can achieve. So it'll be interesting how the state approaches this, if they do a blanket policy, if they try and get out of this solar game, or if they really do allow counties that greater flexibility to continue to invest in solar technology.
All right. Well, thank you so much. There's certainly more that we could talk about, and maybe we'll touch base in a couple years and see where things are at. But I appreciate both of your time, and I hope our audience enjoyed it this morning and learned something. I know I did, and I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.